one of the things we're going to cover today is we're going to go over some of the fundamentals. Just like when ITIL started, you had to kind of go over the fundamentals every time you want to talk about something to do incident change. So as we go with Agile, we're going to talk about Agile and how you can use it in your ITSM project, not just from an application perspective, but also from a process development and applications. Okay, so we're on the next slide here. So just to look at it, here's a basic high-level overview of Agile from a process perspective. Looking at it, that you're going to evaluate your process, identify any improvements and optimizations, then you're going to design and develop, then you're going to implement, and then you're going to continue monitoring and evaluation. Looks very similar to the way a lot of things run. We're going to talk in just a moment about how Agile does all of these typical type of a process flow in a little different way.
Okay, well, let me jump in here then, and I guess that kind of takes us to the next slide here. So this is where it may make a little bit more sense for people that are out there, but let's say that you're going to do ITSM job, and typically that ITSM job, the old way of doing it, you may have done incident, problem, change, configuration management. You may have started with one. You may have gotten incident done and gotten that out of the way, and they say, okay, what's next? And it probably would be change, and then maybe you get to service catalog, and before you know it, a lot of time has gone by, and you may say, well, gee, we didn't really get that much done. What's the deal, right? But I think that what you're talking about is now we've got a framework or maybe even a methodology here where you can get things done a lot quicker. And that is, when you design these things, you can come up with epic stories and tasks, right? And so epic, if you're doing a pyramid, I guess is kind of at the top, right? Why don't you talk a little bit about how that all works out, given the example of, let's say, we want to roll out incident, right?
Okay. Epic stories and tasks are really buckets. They're a way to classify things. So if you're, say, my example there, the service desk users need to submit an incident. You could also have that Tier 2 organizations need to submit an incident, or Tier 2 organizations need to work the ITIL process. And then your stories are pieces of work you can break down from there to tell the story. A service desk user needs to be able to select a customer, needs to be able to provide operational and categorization categories, or select from a list. And then your tasks are where you start breaking down each of those individual things. If you look, not even using out of the box, if you broke it down into something a little more customized, if you were building a customer option, you would need to build a customer table. You would need to create the customer field in the incident form. You would have to link those together. Yes, BMC has already done that. So, in an out-of-the-box kind of solution. But when you look at it, we could definitely tweak a lot of the out-of-the-box. I have a customer I'm working with right now where the out-of-the-box is there's a VIP checkbox. You check that box, and it then shows you a VIP flag. Well, they wanted to add some functionality because they have various levels of VIPs. They have, as the government, they have what they've defined as bronze, silver, gold, and they are looking to add, platinum to that. So not only do they need that, but they needed that extra tweak so they can meet their service level targets, which takes you beyond out of the box. So you could have both process and development tasks using this strategy, and you can see all of the tasks out there, even across multiple epics. And that's going to allow you, we're going to talk about a Kanban board later, that's going to allow you to see what is out there, assign those tasks based on skill sets, and really better control and manage what you're doing day to day. And we'll talk about how that works as we go through this process.
So just so I understand, so if you're doing an incident management rollout, and you're going to map it out this way, you would have several epics then underneath the incident, right? So in this is just one example. The service desk users need to submit incidents, but there would be several more then,
correct.
Right? Okay. Yep. And then these would all be working in parallel, as opposed to the old way of doing it, where you might have somebody working on something, they get done, and they go off to the next one.
And the perfect example of this is, yes, incidents need, one epic may be to submit incidents, but another epic could be to report on that. So as you are getting new requirements, say for the VIP drop-down option, you could also be updating your requirements for reporting all at the same time.
Okay. And you've had experience with this on other jobs as well, right? So this has worked before. So the whole idea is to save time, I think, right? Is to get this thing done. And I believe you're going to be working on a new job that has some very specific deadlines, right? That you're going to have to meet. Yep. And so you're going to have to figure out how to move a little bit quicker then.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and just to give you some timelines on that, we're looking at condensing, standing up a brand new system and condensing at least 2 environments within 3 months, and then the other 5 legacy environments they have will be consolidating within probably the next 3 months following.
Wow.
And if you look at BMC as a whole, in the past, I've seen upgrades for one organization that's not really changing much take up to a year. So we are definitely condensing this table.
Good. Well, you'll have to come back and you'll have to tell us how it goes 3 months from now. So this next slide, I guess, I mentioned Scrum earlier, but I guess one way to look at this is, in terms of Agile, that's kind of the methodology then, right? And so then Scrum is really a framework. Is that how you might
Yes.
view this? So maybe you can give us an idea what this means here.
So looking at this is a really good representation, and you're going to see some other images through this presentation that are going to look very similar, and they're just different ways of looking at kind of the same thing. At the bottom, the important thing is you have a product owner. You have your Scrum Master, who is, lots of times it's a team lead or something like that are going to put together your epics, your stories, your tasks. They really need to have a good understanding of how to do that. But then you have your development team. That development team does not mean just coders. That could be a BMC Remedy developer. That could be a process developer. And what you do is, as you get requirements in, rather than getting requirements, documenting them, and then you stop with the requirements and go off and build, you're always getting new requirements in, and on the left side of the image there, you'll see the backlog. And you put them in your backlog, and then you have with the customer's help, you prioritize what's the top priority for the customer. Because I've seen previous projects where, they'll pick the easiest ones and they'll go through and tackle the easiest one, or they'll come up with some kind of methodology in the order they're working requirements. This way we're saying, let's get the customer's input, because while, it may be easy to do that task, it may not be the top priority for the customer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that brings up a question. One time we were doing a remedy job, and the customer said we want to use an Agile approach, and rather than getting all our requirements ironed out up at the beginning and then freezing the requirements at that point and moving forward, we want you to do this in just little tiny iterative pieces. So we started out and we'd say, is this what you want? And then they'd have a quick meeting and they would say, yes, that looks good, or no, you got to tweak it here. And then we go back and do some more development work. Is that kind of what Scrum's like? Is that?
That's a lot of it, because you're involving your testers up front, so they know what's coming, so they can be writing test scripts as it's being developed. You're involving your customer. We're going to talk about sprints in a minute. You're on a regular interval. And what you want to do is get the work, get them to okay it, get that to production, and not wait until I've been in organizations where it's an all or none approach. Either the system is set up completely and perfectly, or they're not willing to roll it to production. This is kind of the exact opposite of that. This is get what you can out there, because you could have the perfect system when you go live that day, and within 2 weeks something has changed in the organization, which means your perfect application is out of date.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have to wait until you have and with some organizations or customers I've worked with, they want to wait until they have a whole list or a big thing of requirements, and then again do another big bang type approach. This is much more flexible and again, like the name says, more agile.
Well, you mentioned sprint, and I think that's up next. Before we talked about stories, so it looks like a story is a subset of a sprint. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And what you do is you build your tasks, your stories, and then you have your individual tasks. And you can see here from what looks like the hand-drawn image that we're using. Again, on your left-hand side, you have all of your backlog of all the things you need to do. And then up at the top, you have your planning meeting. And this is where you're going to review your stories and review the tasks to complete those stories with your customer. And depends upon what your sprint cycle is. And typically, within Agile, a sprint cycle is recommended to be between 1 and 4 weeks. Every environment's different. Where we were at, we tried a week, we tried 2 weeks, we tried 4 weeks. 2 weeks really worked well for us at my last engagement. It was just enough time to be able to show progression, but not too much time where it kind of got stagnant. So you take those tasks, and what you do with them is you kind of think of you can do this with Post-it notes. I've heard people doing that where you put your different categories, and we're going to show the Kanban table in just a moment. You take your different Post-it notes and say, okay, here's a task, write it on a Post-it note, put all those Post-it notes under to do. And then somebody's going to start working on it. You grab your Post-it note and you put it under the column in progress. When you're done with it, you move it from progress to done. And that's kind of what we're doing. And you'll see kind of about the 4 or 5 o'clock on the cycle there is your daily scrums. And what you do is you have meetings, and this is another slide coming up. You have daily meetings to talk, and we'll review a little more of that. But then as you complete your tasks, your stories are completed. As your stories are completed, your epics are completed.
Okay.
And the other part that I just want to touch on real quick, at the very end, usually in the same meeting you do your sprint planning, you have a retrospective. Did we have any issues and we weren't able to complete everything we said we were going to do in that 2 weeks? You discuss with the customer about what your holdups were, how can you maybe avoid those in the future before you start, and anything left over could then roll into the next sprint. Mm-hmm. And in the top right-hand corner, you'll see kind of how those loops are showing. It's always in the continuous loop, and then it rolls right into the next loop.
Okay. All right. And so you're going to talk about daily Scrum meetings, but before you jump into that, one thing that I've wondered about, we do a number of jobs where we might only have one remedy consultant on the job because somebody may say, hey, maybe we're not in any really great hurry. Let's just tackle one thing at a time, and we might stretch out an implementation over an extended period of time. Do you really have to have more than one consultant then, where Agile, this methodology, or the Scrum makes sense? Because if you just have one guy, what? Okay. Yeah.
And that's very valid. While you may have one consultant working on the project, you typically have multiple resources at the customer site, right. Whether it's being a manager or internal resources that are assisting that individual. This helps the upper management then be able to see something like the Kanban we're going to show in a minute to show who's working each task. Now, if there's one person on site, they may be doing the majority of it. This is a way it's a little bit better than a project plan, I think, to show, and if you look here on the exact slide we're looking at in the top right-hand corner, you can show your burn down chart. So you can show the backlog, and you can show that backlog is being worked and dropped down. You can even show where it may spike and go back up because something's changed and you have a bunch of new requirements. You can better manage scope creep, I think, in that way as well. Because if you set your product backlog maybe early on, anything new that comes into that backlog, it's not that it's not a valid requirement. It may be designated as a phase 2 or a phase 3. And what you don't want to do, or this will help you to not do, is to not lose sight of those items after phase 1 is completed.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's talk about these are stand-up meetings, I take it, right? These daily Scrum meetings?
Yeah. The daily Scrum meetings should be 5 to 10 minutes. I know this is kind of more of just the same Scrum diagram, but what we want to focus on the daily meetings are answering questions where each person stands up that's on the team or on the phone, doesn't have to be in person, and says, here's what I did yesterday, or which tasks I worked on yesterday, here's what I'm going to work on today, and here's what any issues that I may have had.